Every mountain hides a secret, and every story hides a nightmare. Growing up across trailer parks, hidden deep in the southern Ozarks wasn't exactly the dream childhood most people imagine. But even with the rusty porches, muddy roads, and old broken-down homes scattered across the hills, my mother, she worked long shifts, stretched every dollar until it screamed, and somehow still managed to make me feel safe. When I was 9 years old, we lived beside an elderly woman named Clara and her daughter Denise. Denise was probably around my mother's age. Frail, pale, sickly. I remembered when she used to sit outside, watering flowers or waving at passing neighbors, but over time she stopped moving much at all. Eventually, she became confined to a wheelchair. Most days I'd see her sitting silently on the porch wrapped in blankets, even during warm weather. If I waved, she barely reacted. Sometimes I wondered if she even recognized me anymore. Then came the night that changed everything. I woke up sometime after midnight, desperate for water. Summer heat in the Ozarks sticks to your skin like wet cloth, and our tiny trailer felt like an oven. I stumbled into the kitchen half asleep and filled a glass from the sink. That's when I noticed movement through the window. Across the yard in Clara's bedroom window. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Clara wasn't supposed to be standing. She could barely leave her bed anymore. But there she was, thin frame, long white nightgown, motionless in the darkness. I lifted my hand slowly. The figure waved back. A strange relief rushed through me. Maybe she was recovering. Maybe the medicine was helping. Kids accept impossible things easier than adults do, and I smiled before heading back to bed, feeling weirdly happy for her. But exactly 1 week later, it happened again. Another sleepless night, another trip for water. And once again, Clara stood silently at the same window. This time I looked closer. Her face stayed hidden in shadow. I couldn't tell whether her head was lowered or if strands of hair covered her face completely. Something about it unsettled me badly, enough that goosebumps crawled across my arms. Still, when I waved, she answered immediately. The motion looked stiff, delayed, almost unnatural. The next morning, I finally mentioned it to my mom while eating breakfast. Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. "What did you say?" she asked quietly. I explained everything, the waving, the standing, the nighttime appearances. Mom stared at me for several seconds before speaking. "Honey, that couldn't have been Clara." I argued instantly. I knew what I saw. Same nightgown, same room, same thin arms, but Mom shook her head. "Clara hasn't been able to stand for weeks," she whispered. Denise told me she barely stays awake anymore. Cold fear settled into my stomach. I wanted to believe my mom was wrong, but deep down I knew what I'd seen. A few nights later, I woke again around midnight. The figure was back, only this time I didn't wave. I simply stared. And after several seconds, the figure slowly lifted one arm on its own, almost like it already knew I was there watching. Then the kitchen lights flickered. I jumped backward for only a moment. When I looked again, the window was empty. But that wasn't the part that terrified me most. The truly horrifying part came 2 days later. And after the funeral, strange rumors about what happened inside the trailer started spreading through the mountains. But those rumors were nothing compared to the story I heard years later about a hidden church deep in the Ozarks, a church connected to disappearances, secrets, and a journalist who never came home. For most of my adult life, I worked as a small-town journalist in Arkansas. Nothing glamorous, mostly local sports, town meetings, and the occasional crime report. But during those years, I met a reporter named Daniel Mercer, and to this day, I still believe he uncovered something truly evil hidden in the Ozark Mountains. Daniel wasn't some conspiracy addict chasing ghosts. He was respected, smart, the kind of man who could smell a lie before someone even finished speaking. Older reporters admired him because he never rushed stories. If Daniel published something, people trusted it. That's why his death never made sense to me. Officially, police ruled it a suicide. His car was found abandoned near an old bridge outside town during winter. A note sat neatly on the driver's seat claiming he was tired of fighting a recent illness and wanted peace. Most people accepted it, I didn't. Because the night before he disappeared, Daniel visited my apartment carrying a thick brown envelope stuffed with photographs, notes, and cassette recordings. He looked terrified, not nervous, not stressed. Terrified. He told me he was working undercover investigating a church near a remote Ozark community called Hollow Creek Chapel. According to him, the church had suddenly become unbelievably wealthy almost overnight. At first glance, that doesn't sound strange. Wealthy donors renovate churches all the time. But Daniel noticed things that didn't belong in a tiny mountain church. Imported marble floors, professional security systems, hidden cameras built into walls, electronic locks strong enough for a bank vault, and armed security guards. That last detail bothered him most. Why does a church need guards watching every entrance, he asked me. He'd spent weeks attending services with his elderly mother, pretending to be just another visitor. The pastor acted charming in public, but Daniel claimed he described the pastor's smile as too practiced, like he's wearing a human face instead of owning one. Daniel said, the deeper he dug, the stranger things became. One security guard regularly drove several hours south to meet a nightclub owner connected to organized crime. Daniel followed him multiple times and eventually witnessed exchanges involving locked fireproof cases, money or something worse.
Daniel
Believed the church was hiding illegal operations behind religion, but he still didn't know exactly what kind. That's when he made his biggest mistake. He approached one of the guards undercover, pretending to represent wealthy buyers interested in the product the church supposedly supplied. Daniel never told me what product meant, but whatever it was, it frightened him badly. Before leaving my apartment, he handed me the envelope and gave strict instructions. If something happens to me, he said quietly, don't read it, don't call police. Just deliver it. I tried convincing him not to go. He laughed nervously and said something I'll never forget. Rows of small metal beds, children's beds, and hanging above one doorway was a symbol painted in black that definitely did not belong in any Christian church. I delivered the files exactly like Daniel instructed, expecting authorities to launch an investigation immediately. Nothing happened, no arrests, no raids. Nothing. Weeks later, I drove to Hollow Creek Chapel myself. The church still stood there hidden among the trees, like nothing had happened. And when the pastor greeted me at the entrance, he smiled and said my name before I even introduced myself. That's when I realized Daniel had been right all along. They already knew who I was, and somehow they had been expecting me. But what I discovered inside the church was only the beginning. Because years later, another nightmare unfolded in the Ozarks, one involving a heavy metal band, an abandoned cabin, and a night that ended in blood. Back in the early 1990s, me and my friends thought we were going to become legends. We were just a bunch of teenagers from the Ozarks obsessed with loud guitars, horror movies, and heavy metal music. Every spare second we had went into our band. We practiced constantly inside an abandoned cabin hidden deep in the mountains, far away from neighbors who might complain about the noise. We called the place Dogpatch Hollow. The cabin sat alone among thick trees and rocky hillsides. No streetlights. No nearby houses. At night, the darkness there felt endless. Our guitarist Ethan, nicknamed Wizard, carried the whole band. Then there was Tyler, our drummer, and Mason. Mason was different from the rest of us. Brilliant in some ways, disturbing in others. He became obsessed with strange ideas after getting heavily into drugs. LSD, mushrooms, anything he could find. He claimed the substances opened his mind and helped him connect with hidden energy. At first, we laughed it off. Then he started taking it seriously. One night, Mason convinced Tyler and me to trip together at the cabin because he believed it would bond the band spiritually. Weird as it sounds, after that night he became even more convinced we needed to push things further. A week later, Mason called saying he and Wizard planned to trip alone together at Dogpatch Hollow. We thought nothing of it, but late that evening, Tyler and I got bored and decided to head over anyway. As we approached the cabin, we saw Wizard's car parked. We could hear bass guitar vibrating faintly through the walls. Everything seemed normal until we stepped inside. Mason sat shirtless near his amplifier, slowly playing the same distorted bass line over and over again. Wizard's guitar lay abandoned on the floor. That alone terrified me. Wizard treated that instrument better than most people treat family. He would never leave it face down unless something was seriously wrong. Tyler asked where he was. Mason didn't answer, he just kept playing. When we got closer, I noticed tiny droplets of blood covering his arms and chest. "Dude, what happened?" I shouted. Mason finally looked up, his pupils were so wide his eyes looked completely black. Then he smiled. "Wizard's gone," he whispered. At first I thought he meant Wizard had left. Then Tyler noticed the back door hanging slightly open. He walked outside. Seconds later he screamed. I'll never forget that sound as long as I live. I ran outside and saw Tyler, standing frozen near the edge of the clearing. Beyond him, lying face down in the dirt, was Wizard. Blood covered the ground around his body. For one horrible second, I thought he was dead. Tyler grabbed my arm immediately and dragged me backward toward the cabin. He smashed his head open. He shouted, "We need to get out of here now." Inside, Mason continued smiling calmly like none of it mattered. When I demanded to know what happened, he muttered something that still haunts me. He wouldn't commit fully, he said. Then his voice suddenly changed. Louder, angrier, he betrayed us. Tyler shoved me toward his truck, while Mason ranted about loyalty and sacrifice. I could barely process any of it. My mind kept replaying the image of Wizard lying motionless outside. But the nightmare wasn't over. Once inside the truck, Tyler opened the glove compartment and pulled out a handgun. At first, I honestly thought he planned to scare Mason. Then Tyler chambered around. He looked me dead in the eye and said he's not walking. Outside the windshield, Mason suddenly appeared in the cabin doorway, smiling like a man who already knew what was coming. And somehow he looked completely unafraid. The next few minutes would destroy every one of our lives forever. Because before the sun rose over Dogpatch Hollow, gunshots would echo through the mountains, and our band would never exist again. Tyler stepped out of the truck, gripping the handgun so tightly his knuckles looked white in the moonlight. Begging him to calm down, but he barely listened. Mason stood in the cabin doorway smiling strangely, almost peacefully, as though he'd accepted whatever happened next. The forest around us had gone completely silent. No insects. No wind. Nothing. Tyler marched straight toward him and shoved the barrel of the gun against Mason's face. "You think this is funny?" Tyler shouted. Mason laughed softly. Not nervous laughter either. The kind that makes your skin crawl. Then he spread his arms wide and said, "If you think I deserve it, do it." For a second, I truly believed Tyler wouldn't pull the trigger. He screamed every curse imaginable, shaking with rage, while Mason just stood there grinning. Then everything exploded. The gun fired. The sound cracked through the mountains like lightning. Mason collapsed backward instantly. I froze. Tyler froze too. Neither of us moved for several seconds. My ears rang so badly I could barely hear myself breathing. Mason lay twitching near the doorway with blood pouring down his chin and chest. "Oh God," I whispered. Tyler looked completely horrified at what he'd done. Suddenly, reality crashed down on us all at once. Wizard was dying outside. Mason had just been shot, and we were miles from help. Tyler grabbed my shoulder hard enough to hurt and yelled for me to get back in the truck. He wanted to leave before police arrived, before anyone could connect him to the shooting. But I couldn't stop thinking about Wizard. What if he was still alive? That single thought saved lives that night we drove, until we found a farmhouse with lights still on. I practically fell out of the truck, pounding on the door while Tyler stayed behind the wheel, trembling. An older couple answered, terrified by the blood on my clothes. I called 911 immediately. Then Tyler drove away into the darkness before police arrived. That was the last time I ever saw him. Paramedics reached the cabin, surprisingly fast considering how remote Dogpatch Hollow was. Against all odds, both Wizard and Mason were still alive. Wizard had suffered massive head trauma. Doctors later said another 30 minutes without help would have killed him. Mason survived too, though the bullet tore through his jaw and shattered most of his teeth. Somehow it missed anything instantly fatal. The investigation that followed destroyed what remained of our lives. Mason admitted during questioning that he attacked Wizard while hallucinating on LSD. He believed Wizard was betraying the band by secretly playing music with another group in town. According to Mason, the drugs twisted his paranoia until he convinced himself violence was justified. He was sentenced to prison for attempted murder. Wizard spent nearly a year relearning basic movement after brain surgery. Worst of all, he temporarily lost the ability to play guitar properly. Watching someone with that much talent struggle to form simple chords again was heartbreaking. As for Tyler, he disappeared completely. Police searched for months but never found him. Some people believed he fled the country, thinking he'd killed Mason. Others claimed he died somewhere in the mountains, trying to avoid arrest. I honestly don't know what happened. But there's one detail I've never shared publicly before the night after the shooting. While giving my statement at the sheriff's office, an older deputy pulled me aside privately. He asked one strange question. "Did Mason say anything unusual before the attack?" I repeated the part about betrayal and sacrifice. The deputy's expression immediately changed. Then he asked quietly, "Did he mention hearing voices? Or seeing people in the woods?" I said no. The deputy looked relieved for only a second before muttering something under his breath that chilled me. "You boys should have stayed away from that hollow." Before I could ask what he meant, he walked away. Years later, I returned to Dogpatch Hollow, alone, hoping to finally put the memories behind me. The cabin had mostly collapsed by then. Trees had swallowed the path leading there. But carved into one surviving wall, hidden beneath layers of dirt and moss, I found a symbol scratched deep into the wood. The exact same symbol Daniel photographed inside the church basement years earlier. That's when I realized something horrifying. Maybe none of these stories were separate at all. Maybe something had always been hiding in those mountains, watching, waiting, and feeding on anyone unlucky enough to cross its path.